Macnamara is the new name of our federal electorate, and climate change is a hot topic in this electorate. As you know, a high proportion of the electorate is built on low-lying, often reclaimed land and hence vulnerable to sea level rises. 4,274 constituents have written that their opposition to the Adani mine will influence their vote at this election. The Australian Conservation Foundation, ACF, has 6,232 Macnamara citizens in its supporter base. And all of you are here tonight to hear what the candidates have to say. So, let's get started.
I believe passionately that reasoned and civil public debate is a cornerstone of a flourishing democracy, and I commend the organisers for making this event possible. So, I want to start with a quick straw poll. Please raise your hand if climate change will be a significant factor in determining how you vote at the election.
Often I'm asked, why should Australia care about responding to this challenge? We only represent 1.3% of global emissions. We only represent 0.3% of global population. So that means the average one of us here emits 4 times as much as the average citizen on this planet. So perhaps that should be enough to make some of us consider that we have a moral responsibility, especially as one of the wealthiest nations, to respond here. In a carbon-constrained global economy, Australia is once again the lucky country. We have these boundless plains that are windswept and sun-drenched. Our clean energy resources are the envy of the world. We know we're a lucky country, but are we going to be a clever country? Thank you.
In 2009, the international medical journal The Lancet published a collection of the best available evidence on climate change and health, and they concluded that climate change posed the most serious threat to global public health of the 21st century. This quote here from Nobel laureate for medicine, Professor Peter Doherty, is a sobering reflection on the position in which we find ourselves. Without urgent action on climate change, the conditions that underpin the health and well-being of the human population will be greatly diminished in coming decades and may only be available to a small number of people living in a few parts of the planet by the end of this century. We're talking about the lives of people who are alive right now.
As a 16-year-old, I know the truth of the situation. I know that there is only 12 years left until climate change becomes irreversible. I know that sea levels are rising at a rate in which we have not seen for centuries. I know that every year that I have been alive, I have experienced a summer hotter than the last. It is this knowledge that has brought me here today, to stand up in front of the politicians that may be soon elected into the House of Representatives and demand change. I stand here on behalf of the 1.6 million students worldwide, the 50,000 students in Melbourne that striked from school on March 15th, for their futures.
This election is the climate election. And what does that mean? That means we need to rapidly transition to 100% renewable energy, and we need to have a plan to do it. The Greens do have this plan. We have a unique opportunity here in Macnamara, the Greens' most marginal seat in the country. You have my commitment that if I am elected in this seat, I will spend every working hour working towards a cleaner future for our next generation, for our current generation, and making sure that our next Labor government, because I'm sure as hell positive, I'm pretty sure we're going to kick out this Liberal government, but making sure that our next Labor government is the best government it can be, that it takes us to where we need to be to avert catastrophic climate change. Thank you.
This is the climate election, And quite frankly, this election is not really about me, it's not about my opponents. This is about the direction of our country. This is about the direction that our nation needs to go. And quite frankly, we can't afford another 3 years of coalition government. We need to change our government, and we need to elect a progressive Labor government in our nation, and we will do it, and we will change the way we deal with this issue. We will bring down our emissions. I'm really excited to be here tonight. We have a great story to tell, and I thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
Climate change is real. I trust the science. I trust the CSIRO, the Bureau of Meteorology, NASA, the IPCC, and David Attenborough. Humanity contributes to climate change, and I agree, we must take action to address this very serious global challenge, and Australia must play her part. Our economy must transition to a renewable future, but we must do so in a measured and responsible way that protects jobs and the most vulnerable in our community, and that is always undertaken in a global context as part of a global approach to tackling climate change. Thank you.
Under the Paris Agreement, Australia has committed to reduce, and I want a yes-no answer here, reduce its emissions by 26 to 28% from 2005 levels by 2030. Will Australia meet that target under current policy settings without using carryover credits from Kyoto? Yes or no?
No.
Nope.
Yes or no answer?
Yes or no answer?
Yes.
Let me invite questions from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll start with one that's come in online while the microphones come to you. And this is a question about Adani. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says emissions have to be halved by 2030, reduced to zero by 2050. In that context, many people say Adani in the Galilee Basin, which is the world's second biggest reserve of thermal coal, should not go ahead. Others say exporting coal from Adani would benefit India and secure jobs in Queensland. So what is your position? And this is not a yes or no answer. You can give a more detailed answer now. What is your position on the Adani mine and other mining in the Galilee Basin?
Thank goodness it's not a yes or no question, Peter.
But I'll get you to keep it brief.
Let me start by saying I don't want to see this thing built. And I don't want to see any other mine in the Galilee Basin being built, not Clive Palmer's. Not Clive Palmer's and not Gina Rinehart's and not some of the other mines that are waiting. One of the big obstacles that we need to make sure doesn't happen is the train line to walk between the Galilee and the port, which is so crucial as to why we can't have any public money underwriting this, and we can't have any public money underwriting any new coal projects, full stop. So, the only other two things I'd like to say is I don't think this mine is going to go ahead. I think that the Queensland government has stopped approvals mainly recently due to the black-throated finch, and we also have seen Adani desperate over the last few years trying to get other companies to co-invest. And of course recently they announced a significantly scaled down project with no other partners. In other words, no one else wants to invest in new coal assets because the markets are dying. We saw after the Warsaw Conference last year all of the world's major energy investment companies making a very clear statement that they want to get out of thermal coal in OECD countries by 2030. And if we don't do anything now, we're going to be left with assets that aren't worth anything. So I don't think this thing's going to go ahead. The other thing I would also say is that, you know, I know that there is a lot of pressure on the Labor Party on this, and I hear you. I absolutely hear you, and I'm with you on this issue. There is a lot of the discussions I've had, and some brilliant discussions with the Conservation Foundation, with Stop Adani, Macnamara, and a lot of the other local groups. And this is something that this has been an ongoing discussion around the 2004 decision by the Howard government to block a wind farm by Russell Broadbent, the local member. where that decision, where it was taken as a political decision, was challenged in court, and then in 2004, after the election, the Howard government was forced to grant the wind farm approval. And I don't want to be doing anything where we are giving Adani any extra advantage, whether it's public funds or whether if we do take a political position on this, that then gets challenged in court and thrown out. So it is complex, but I don't want to see this mine go ahead.
Okay, Steph or Kate?
It's a little more simple for us. We will block this Adani coal mine, and as much as I like to... And whilst I'm encouraged to hear Josh's personal views on the Adani coal mine, it is simply not enough. We are hearing weasel words, we are hearing equivocation from Bill Shorten, depending on which postcode he's in. If it's in Queensland, it seems like an okay idea. If he's in Victoria, something entirely different. The Adani coal mine is a symbol, as Josh said, of where we stand as a nation on climate change. If we let this coal mine go ahead, we are saying, basically, stuff you to the next generation. Yesterday, Bob Brown dropped into our campaign office and he's busily organising the convoy to stop Adani. I think Bob was actually hoping to enjoy his retirement, but that's a far cry from that with these sorts of proposals on the table. And he said to me, Steph, in 40 years' time, people will be talking about the campaign to stop Adani like they now talk about the Franklin. Where were you and what did you do, they'll ask. The Greens are standing with the community and the next generation to say, no Adani mine, you are not welcome here.
The resources sector employs about 1 million people, and coal comprises 8% of our economy, about at least 50,000 jobs. I'm actually with Mr Shorten on this one, and I just want to get his words absolutely right. Mr Shorten has said there's a role for coal, and he's right. Labor is right. There is a role for coal. While our economy gradually transitions to renewables, there's a role for 50,000 jobs and all the family members of those people who are employed and who are supported by those employees. Mr Albanese has said, and I want to get this absolutely correct, Labor has to stand up for Labor values, jobs and making sure the economy can function. He's right. I agree. We must stand up for jobs.
So you support the Adani project?
The Adani project is a private proposal. Like Mr Shorten said, it's just another proposal. It needs to meet its environmental, financial obligations.
And if it does, it's okay, then it goes ahead.
Well, it needs to stack up on its own.
This is a question for Josh, and it's a yes or no answer, please. Having just released a climate policy that makes no mention of gas, stopping coal exports, coal mines or coal-fired power stations, the Australian people are understandably sceptical of Labor's climate policy since it effectively ignores the actual cause of climate change. So, as an act of good faith, will you commit to reviewing Adani's environmental approvals and acting on that review before the election, yes or no?
Peter, I need your help here, mate.
Well, do you want to just refer to your previous answer? I think you did give a position before.
It's very hard to answer that question with a yes or no because there's so many points that you make and some really good ones as well. So if you bear with me, I'm not going to say yes or no because I don't think I can. But let me say this, that I don't want to see the mine go ahead, and I absolutely recognise that we need to be moving away from coal.
Let me follow up with a question, Josh, and that would be this. Why doesn't Labor policy mention coal mining? Why doesn't Labor say anything about phasing out coal mining, which is phasing out coal mining and coal exports from Australia, which is the primary source of emissions?
Look, we do, and it's in our platform. We have emphatically said that we need to be moving away from coal. We have emphatically said that we need to have no public money in underwriting new coal projects. We are not the Liberal Party. We have not said to Barnaby Joyce that we want to have a feasibility study into new coal. We don't. We need to be investing in renewables, and you know, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's batteries, whether it's hydro, whether it's looking at transforming our vehicles, whether it's reducing land clearing, whether it's introducing a waste commissioner. I mean, we have a suite of policies that we want to reduce the amount of pollution and carbon in our atmosphere, and we don't want coal to be a part of our future.
Another question.
I'd be interested in each one of the candidates' comments about, as I know Josh touched on it, about where they see automotive manufacturing in Australia going forward.
We're for jobs. We've created over 1 million jobs over the last 5 years. The unemployment rate's 4.9%. We've got a plan to create another 1.25 million jobs over the years ahead. So the track record is there. We're for jobs.
So the specific question was about the manufacturing industry and auto manufacturing in particular. So I might rephrase that question a bit and say, what's your position on supporting the growth of a market in electric vehicles and manufacturing electric vehicles in Australia?
Well, it's a very exciting prospect. I mean, as I said, I drive a hybrid car, so I'm personally invested in it, and because of that, I'm particularly excited that the government at the moment is working on the electric vehicle strategy in the consultation phase, working with the experts around the country, because there are complexities, things like, do we need a common charging plug? Because that obviously affects the costs of setting up. There are regulations, Australian standards and things like that. So it's a complex matter. It's currently underway. And I'm very pleased to see that it's a priority that's being worked on as we speak by those that know best.
So we have a policy. Our policy is to have 50% of new vehicles to be electric vehicles by 2030. And I was actually in Canberra, I remember it well, the day that Joe Hockey goaded the car industry out of Australia. And of course they left. And not only did they leave with thousands of manufacturing jobs and subsidiary businesses, they also left with the largest employer of research and developers and engineers in this country. We want to bring that back, and we want to bring back a car manufacturing industry and incentivise businesses and families and people to be buying and producing electric vehicles in our country.
Thanks, and we have some really exciting policies around bringing in more electric vehicles into the market, but I also want to go back to the broader issue of jobs and employment. And some people have said that Labor's goal of 50% renewable energy by 2030 is really quite ambitious. But as we heard Simon say in his opening, we're actually on track to reach that already. And that's, from what I've heard, quite a conservative estimate of what sort of emissions reductions we're going to see by 2030 with no action. I've actually heard figures around 78%. We're going to reach 78% of renewable energy by 2030 with no action. So Labor's policy of 45% renewables by 2030 could potentially see a retraction of 18,000 jobs in these areas. So there are a huge number of jobs we're talking about. And similarly, we also need to have that plan for phasing out those coal-powered fire plants, because that's where we're going to see the jobs in mine rehabilitation that have been overlooked. That's how we bring back the control into our politicians' hands rather than those of the boardrooms who decide when coal isn't profitable for them anymore.
So last month, over 50,000 students and myself marched at the school strike with 3 demands. Which were to stop Adani, no new coal or gas projects, and 100% renewables by 2030. Which one of you will best be able to commit to the urgent demands of young people before our planet is destroyed?
Thank you very much. I was also at the climate rally marching with those thousands of students, and it was a great occasion. I've mentioned Adani. I don't want to see this thing go ahead. I've outlined the reasons why I think we need to be a little bit cautious, but make no mistake, I will be doing everything I can to stop this thing going ahead. In regards to coal, we need to move away from coal. We need to be creating new industries to transition. One of the best things I think we did in Victoria, in the Victorian Labor government, was when we saw the closure of the Hazelwood mine fire. What we did, and what Daniel Andrews did, was create new industry in the Latrobe Valley. what we saw was the creation of Solar Victoria, the government agency that's going to be, or that is responsible for installing 650,000 solar panels on Victorian homes. What we did is we saw a government that didn't leave workers behind and transition and help create new energy, new industry and new jobs for people to move into, and jobs that are good for the environment. I think we can take that example and move it across the world, across the country.
I don't want to see this thing go ahead. What about the 50,000 workers in the coal sector that are unionised workers, that are members of the Australian Labor Party through their union membership? Do they not deserve representation? Shouldn't you be honest with them?
Can I...
And perhaps that's a rhetorical question.
Well, I think, well, briefly, but I think he's actually answered that question. But let me put another question to you, Kate, which is a follow-up one. If coal-fired power plants are being cancelled around the world, if export markets are showing an increasing lack of interest in buying Australian coal, why would we be committing to this industry? Why wouldn't your party and the coalition be actively transitioning away from coal, because it is an industry, according to a lot of what we've heard tonight, that has no future?
I'll answer your question, Peter, then I'll come back to the question about the climate strike. With all due respect, new coal mines are going ahead. They are being constructed, particularly in China, at a rapid rate. And if we were to switch off our coal industry overnight, it would make...
I didn't suggest switching it off. I said, why not prepare for the transition?
Well, the question was prefaced with if, which is not the case. So
you don't accept the premise that coal is on the way out? You don't accept that premise?
No, that's not the question that was asked. The question
was... No, this is my question, is you don't accept... My question was premised on the fact that coal is a declining industry.
But it's not a declining industry. That was the point that I was taking. It's not a declining industry around the world. If we were to switch ours off overnight, the void will be filled by countries who were not subscribing to the Paris Agreement. That is the moral reality of the global situation. So it's important to be very clear about these things, where we fit into a global picture. May I come to the question about the climate strike? Again, I respect individual choice. I respect the choice of parents, how they wish to raise their children. If they wish their children to attend the strike, that is my personal opinion. I'm very happy to say that. On the day of the climate strike, I was at a local school with the Education Minister attending events for the National Day Against Bullying and Violence, which millions of children in over 5,000 schools around our nation were undertaking events on that very important day for that very important issue.
Personal choice isn't enough to save the next generation. It's simply not enough. We have seen a complete leadership void over the decades, and we need action. I am door knocking with 16-year-olds on weekends who are saying, stop messing up our future. They care, they know that we don't have long, they know that our politicians need to act now. As I said, no more weasel words, no equivocating, personally I support this or personally I don't support that. Both of your political parties do not support a rapid transition, 100% transition away from fossil fuels by the time we need to. Both of your parties accept massive donations from coal and gas, and the ALP actually accepts more from the gas industry than the coalition. Dan Andrews has opened up exploration licence off our pristine coasts of Victoria. There is no time for equivocation. To your question of Adani, you know the Greens stand in opposition to Adani, and we will fight. I will be on the blockade if that's what it takes. No new coal or gas. You know where we stand on no new coal or gas. Not just me personally, the whole Greens party. You know where we stand. And 100% renewables, yet let's just get on with it. And let's stop pitting this as a contest, but environment versus economy. That's not how it works. They work in collaboration with one another, and they are opening...
So I've asked specific follow-up questions of the two other candidates. Now I've got a specific one for you, Steph, and that is this, that exports of coal and natural and LNG, Australia will this year be the largest exporter of LNG in the world. Coal exports have overtaken iron ore exports. Something like $120 billion worth of exports in this financial year. What do the Greens say they're going to replace that with?
Absolutely, and we're not saying phase it out overnight. This plan, it's a very, very good plan. I encourage you to go away and look at it. It has got a roadmap of how we transition fairly and how we make sure that our workers are looked after as this transition takes place. As I mentioned in the opening, hydrogen, exporting hydrogen is a massive, potentially massive industry for us. Japan and South Korea are crying out for this resource, and we are so well placed to provide it. We need to invest in more greatly in research and development and explore these new industries, but we're not saying phase it out overnight. We have got a plan, and this protects workers, it protects our environment, and it looks out for the next generation.
We need to be transitioning away from coal. We need to be transitioning away from coal, and we have a plan to do it. We need to be growing renewable energies in this country. That's why we want to fund the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to the tune of $10 billion. That's why we want to be connecting up new renewable technology with a $5 billion investment. That's why we want to be creating a $1 billion hydrogen fund. We have a significant plan to try and grow renewable energy. And I've sort of copped it from both sides a little bit. We can transition away and we can save jobs, absolutely. And we shouldn't be investing in new coal technology. The only people in this country that want to invest in new coal technology are Barnaby Joyce in the National Party and Scott Morrison as a Prime Minister. And no one in the Labor Party is saying that we should be investing in new coal technology. We need to be ready to catch workers when those industries fall away. And I'll just say one thing, right? I'll just say one thing. Going back to Hazelwood, right? It was the biggest example of the closure of a coal-fired power station in our state. And I remember vividly that day when Engie announced that they were going to close that mine. The Greens Party released a statement celebrating the closure of that mine, and there were many in the Labor Party. That also wanted to celebrate the closure of that dirty coal-fired power station. But Daniel Andrews released a different statement. It said, here are what we're going to do for all of the workers. And while the Greens Party celebrated, the Labor Party got to work. And I know that the policies that from the Greens Party are obviously, they are right, very good. But we also have a plan to move away from old, dirty-fired coal power station. We have a plan to move away from gas. It's through hydrogen and new industries. We will support workers, but we need to be creating new industries, and that's what a Labor government will do.
You were there, next to the Premier, when the royalties were tripled for the coal-fired power station. You were there when 25% of our capacity for electricity generation was switched off overnight, and then the lights started going out and the blackouts started occurring. So talking about irresponsibility, you were right there when it was all happening. Workers out of jobs, people out of electricity. Lights literally went out because of the loss of capacity.
As representatives for Macnamara, we ask you to use your positions to campaign your parties into treating climate change with the urgency that it demands. As someone who will be voting for the first time in the upcoming federal election, I represent your new target audience and a generation of voters who will approach the ballot with climate action at the forefront of our minds. Now is the time to ask yourselves if your party's policies reflect this, and if not, now is the time to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina and Annalise, and thank you to all our speakers tonight. I particularly want to thank the candidates for turning up and answering your tough questions. And I'm going to hand back over now to Pam O'Neill, the convener of tonight's event, to say a few closing words.
Thanks, Peter. I'll be quick. Okay, what a fantastic night. Thank you all very much for coming and for staying all this time. And thank you especially to the candidates and the speakers, and especially to the student speakers. And to Peter, who did a fantastic job in moderating.